Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash catch the all legendary Pokemon. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Whispering Summit. The air at the roof of the world was thin, sharp, and tasted of ozone and ancient stone. It was a purity that scoured the lungs, a stark contrast to the cloying humidity of the verdant expanse far below. Here, on the peak of Mount Argent, the sky was a canvas of bruised indigo and the nascent blush of dawn. Jagged spires of rock, veined with silver ore that shimmered under the nascent light, clawed at the heavens, their surfaces slick with a crystalline frost that never melted. This was the domain of gods and myths, a place where the veil between worlds was said to be as thin as a dragonfly's wing. And it was here that Ash Ketchum had chosen to make his stand. He stood not as a challenger, but as a guardian. His silhouette was a stark line of defiance against the swirling, ethereal mists that coiled around the summit. At 22, the boyish enthusiasm that had once defined him had been forged into a quiet, unyielding confidence. The years had stripped away the naivety, leaving behind a core of tempered steel. His raven hair, still an untamable mess, was whipped by the high-altitude winds, and his auracite, a rare gift honed through years of communing with Lucario, painted the world in a vibrant tapestry of energy signatures. The very rock beneath his feet pulsed with a slow, deep power, the lifeblood of the mountain itself. Pikachu, a constant companion and a brother in all but blood, was a warm, vibrant knot of crackling yellow energy perched on his shoulder. His usual cheerful chirps were replaced by a low, rumbling growl, his cheeks sparking with contained power. He was a mirror to Ash's own coiled readiness, his senses extended, tasting the electricity in the air, feeling the subtle shift in barometric pressure that heralded the arrival of their quarry. "Easy, buddy," Ash murmured, his voice a low counterpoint to the keening wind. He didn't need to speak aloud. Their bond was such that thoughts and intentions flowed between them as freely as the air they breathed. "Let them come." We knew this was a possibility. His gaze swept across the makeshift camp. It was a study in efficient minimalism, a testament to a life lived on the edge of civilization. A single, high-tensile synth silk tent, camouflaged to mimic the silver-veined rock, was pegged securely against a sheer cliff face. A compact, solar-powered purification unit hummed softly, its indicator light a tiny green star in the pre-dawn gloom. A series of small, almost invisible sensors were embedded in the surrounding rock, feeding a constant stream of data to the custom-built Pokénav secured to his wrist. Technology and nature, seamlessly integrated. This was the way of the Aegis, the ancient order he now represented. A flicker of movement drew his attention. Lyra, her form a graceful silhouette against the paling sky, emerged from the tent. Her silver hair, a stark contrast to her tanned skin, was braided in an intricate pattern that spoke of her heritage as a child of the Dragon's Teeth, the fierce, independent clans that called the treacherous mountain ranges of Eridor home. She moved with the silent, predatory grace of a leopard, her every step sure and deliberate on the uneven ground. Her eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on Ash, a silent question in their depths. "They're close," Ash said, his voice carrying easily on the wind. "The atmospheric pressure is dropping too quickly, and the mountain, it's afraid." Lyra joined him at the edge of the precipice, the sheer drop falling away into a sea of clouds below. She wore a fitted, insulated suit of a deep indigo, its material a marvel of Eridorian ingenuity, capable of regulating body temperature in the most extreme conditions. A pair of intricately carved daggers were strapped to her thighs, their hilts shaped like the fangs of a dragon-type Pokémon. "Fear is a luxury we cannot afford, Ash," she replied, her voice a melodic alto, laced with the unique, almost musical cadence of her people. "The Aegis does not fear, it endures." "I'm not afraid, Lyra," Ash corrected, a faint smile touching his lips. "I'm anticipating. There's a difference." His smile was a rare thing these days, a fleeting glimpse of the boy he had once been. It was a smile that held a hint of danger, a promise of a storm about to break. It was a smile that Lyra found herself increasingly drawn to, a magnetic pull that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had met Ash a year ago, when he had first arrived in Eridor. He had come not as a tourist or a challenger, but as a seeker of knowledge, a student of the ancient ways. He had sought out the Dragon's Teeth, not with the arrogance of an outsider, but with the quiet humility of a true warrior. He had learned their customs, their language, their unique style of combat, a fluid, dance-like martial art that mimicked the movements of dragon-type Pokémon. He had earned their respect, a feat few outsiders could claim. And then, he had revealed his true purpose. He was the last scion of the Aegis, an order that had once protected the balance between the world of humans and the world of the legendary Pokémon. He had come to Eridor to awaken the dormant power of Mount Argent, a power that was inextricably linked to the legendary bird, Lugia, the guardian of the seas. The world had forgotten the Aegis, dismissed them as myth. But the dragon's teeth had not. Their oral traditions spoke of a time when the Aegis had walked among them, their power a shield against the encroaching darkness. And now, one had returned. A sudden, piercing cry ripped through the air, a sound that was both beautiful and terrifying. It was the call of a Skarmory, but this was no ordinary Pokémon. It was larger, its metallic feathers gleaming with an unnatural sheen, its eyes burning with a malevolent red light. It was a creature of the Shadow Syndicate, a rogue organization that sought to capture and control legendary Pokémon for their own nefarious purposes. Ash and Lyra moved as one, their movements a symphony of practiced efficiency. Lyra drew her daggers, their edges humming with a faint energy. Ash's hand went to his belt, his fingers brushing against the smooth, cool surface of a Pokeball. "Pikachu, Thunderwave," Ash commanded, his voice calm and steady. Pikachu didn't need to be told twice. He leapt from Ash's shoulder, a blur of yellow lightning. A wave of crackling, paralyzing energy shot out, striking the Skarmory mid-flight. The metallic bird convulsed, its wings seizing up, and it began to plummet towards the ground. But it was not alone. From the swirling mists below, a dozen more shadow Skarmory emerged, their cries a cacophony of metallic shrieks. They were followed by a squadron of sleek, black aircraft, their engines silent, their canopies tinted to obscure the pilots within. The Shadow Syndicate had arrived in force. "They're more desperate than I thought," Lyra observed, her eyes narrowed, her daggers held in a defensive posture. "Desperation makes them predictable," Ash countered. He released the Pokémon from his belt. It was not a creature of immense size or power, but a small, unassuming Espeon, its lavender fur seeming to glow in the dim light. The gem on its forehead pulsed with a gentle, psychic energy. "Espeon, psychic terrain," Ash said. The Espeon's eyes glowed with an intense pink light. A wave of psychic energy washed over the summit, a visible shimmer in the air. The ground beneath their feet began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. Any priority moves, any sneak attacks, would now be nullified. It was a subtle, strategic move, a testament to Ash's deep understanding of Pokémon battles. The Shadow Syndicate's aircraft swooped in, their side doors sliding open to reveal grunts armed with strange, energy-based weaponry. They were not aiming for Ash or Lyra, but for the very peak of the mountain, a crystalline structure that pulsed with a faint, silvery light. This was the heart of the mountain, the focal point of its power, and the key to awakening Lugia. "They're trying to destabilize the heart," Lyra said, her voice tight with urgency. "They won't succeed," Ash replied, his confidence unwavering. "Charizard, let's go." He threw another Pokeball, and with a flash of red light, the mighty Fire-type appeared, his roar a challenge that shook the very foundations of the mountain. This was not the Charizard of Ash's youth, prone to disobedience and arrogance. This was a warrior, his scales a deep, burnished orange, his eyes burning with a fierce intelligence. He had fought alongside Ash in countless battles, their bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity. "Flamethrower, wide arc," Ash commanded. Charizard unleashed a torrent of fire, a searing wave of heat that washed over the approaching aircraft. The pilots, caught off guard by the sheer intensity of the attack, veered away, their formations breaking. But the Shadow Syndicate was relentless. From the lead aircraft, a figure emerged, clad in a sleek, black uniform that seemed to absorb the light. He wore a helmet that obscured his face, but there was an aura of cold, calculating menace about him that was unmistakable. This was Cypher, one of the Syndicate's top commanders. "Ash Ketchum," Cypher's voice crackled through a speaker, a synthetic, toneless sound that sent a shiver down Lyra's spine. "The last of the Aegis. A relic of a bygone era. Surrender the heart of the mountain, and I may spare your life." "The Aegis doesn't surrender," Ash shot back, his eyes flashing with defiance. "And we don't negotiate with terrorists." Cypher let out a cold, humorless laugh. "So be it. You have chosen the path of oblivion. He raised a hand, and from the aircraft behind him, a massive, shadowy creature emerged. It was a Tyranitar, but twisted and corrupted, its rocky hide pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. This was a shadow Pokémon, a creature whose heart had been artificially closed, its power amplified to terrifying levels. A shadow Tyranitar, Lyra breathed, her knuckles white as she gripped her daggers. I've only heard stories. Stories don't do them justice, Ash said, his expression grim. Charizard, Dragonclaw. Pikachu, Volt Tackle. The two Pokémon launched themselves at the shadow Tyranitar, a blur of fire and lightning. Charizard's claws glowed with a draconic energy, while Pikachu became a living thunderbolt, crackling with untamed power. The battle that followed was a maelstrom of elemental fury. The summit of Mount Argent became a war zone, the air thick with the scent of ozone and burnt rock. The shadow grunts, emboldened by the presence of their commander, pressed their attack, their energy weapons firing relentlessly at the heart of the mountain. Lyra moved like a phantom, a whirlwind of flashing steel. Her daggers were an extension of her will, deflecting energy blasts, disarming opponents with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and deadly. She was a daughter of the mountains, and she would not allow these invaders to defile her sacred home. Ash was the calm at the center of the storm. He moved with a purpose and a clarity that was almost preternatural. He was not just a trainer, he was a battlefield commander, his mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations. He saw not just the immediate threats, but the flow of the entire battle, the shifting tides of energy and momentum. Espeon, protect the heart, he commanded, his voice cutting through the din of battle. Reflect any incoming attacks. The Psychic-type Pokémon positioned itself in front of the crystalline structure, its gem glowing with a protective light. A barrier of pure psychic energy formed around the heart, deflecting the energy blasts of the shadow grunts. Meanwhile, the battle between Charizard, Pikachu, and the shadow Tyranitar raged on. The corrupted Pokémon was a force of nature, its every stomp and roar sending shockwaves through the mountain. It was fueled by an unnatural rage, a dark energy that made it incredibly powerful, but also reckless. It's not thinking, Ash observed, his aura sight allowing him to see the chaotic, discordant energy swirling around the shadow Tyranitar. It's just a puppet. We need to sever the strings. He closed his eyes for a moment, his consciousness reaching out, not to his Pokémon, but to the mountain itself. He could feel its pain, its fear, its ancient, slumbering power. He was the Aegis, and his connection to the legendary Pokémon was not one of master and servant, but of guardian and ward. Lugia, he whispered, his voice a silent plea. Lend me your strength. A subtle shift occurred in the air, a change in the quality of the light. The silver veins in the rock around them began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. The wind, which had been a chaotic gale, now seemed to have a purpose, a direction. It swirled around Ash, a vortex of unseen energy. Cypher, from his perch on the aircraft, felt the change. His helmet's sensors went haywire, unable to quantify the sudden surge of power. What is this? He hissed, a note of uncertainty creeping into his synthetic voice. Ash's eyes snapped open. They were no longer the warm, familiar brown that Lyra knew. They were glowing with an inner light, a swirling, silver luminescence that seemed to hold the power of the storm. Now, Pikachu, he roared, his voice imbued with a newfound power, thunder of the heavens. Pikachu, empowered by the surge of energy from the mountain, unleashed a bolt of lightning unlike any he had ever summoned before. It was not a simple thunder attack. It was a spear of pure, unadulterated energy, a direct conduit to the storm that slumbered within the heart of the world. The lightning bolt struck the shadow Tyranitar, and for a moment, the world was bathed in a blinding white light. The corrupted Pokémon let out a final, agonized roar, and then, its shadowy aura dissipated, leaving behind a confused, exhausted Tyranitar, its eyes no longer burning with a malevolent red light, but with a dawning awareness. Cypher, stunned by the sudden turn of events, could only watch as the Tyranitar, now freed from his control, turned its attention to the aircraft it had been launched from. With a roar of defiance, it unleashed a hyper beam, a devastating blast of energy that tore through the wing of the aircraft, sending it spiraling out of control. Retreat! Cypher shrieked, his composure finally shattering. All units, retreat. The remaining shadow aircraft turned and fled, the grunts scrambling to get back inside. The corrupted Skarmory, their will to fight broken, followed suit, their metallic wings carrying them away into the swirling mists. As quickly as it had begun, the battle was over. The only sounds on the summit were the sighing of the wind and the crackle of the last embers of Charizard's fire. Ash stood panting, the silver light in his eyes slowly fading. The connection to the mountain's power had taken its toll, leaving him drained but exhilarated. Pikachu, equally exhausted, scampered back to his shoulder, nuzzling against his cheek. Lyra approached him, her daggers now sheathed. Her expression was a mixture of awe and concern. She had seen Ash in battle before, but never like this. It was as if he had become something more than human, a conduit for a power that was both ancient and terrifying. "What was that?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "That," Ash said, a tired smile gracing his lips, was a glimpse of what the Aegis is capable of. He looked at the heart of the mountain, which was now pulsing with a steady, rhythmic light, like a beating heart. The awakening had begun. But this was only the beginning. The Shadow Syndicate, though repelled, would not be so easily defeated. They had tasted the power of a legendary Pokémon, and they would be back, with greater force, with more cunning strategies. And there were other, older threats stirring in the shadows, ancient rivalries and forgotten enmities that had been awakened by the resurgence of the Aegis. The world was a chessboard, and the pieces were beginning to move. As the first rays of the sun broke over the horizon, painting the snow-capped peaks in hues of orange and gold, Ash knew that his journey was far from over. He had made a promise to protect the balance, to be the shield against the coming storm. And as he looked at Lyra, at the fierce determination in her eyes, he knew that he would not have to face it alone. The world of Eridor was a tapestry of ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology, a place where myths walked among mortals and the line between the sacred and the profane was constantly being redrawn. The capital city, Aethelgard, was a marvel of architectural ingenuity, a sprawling metropolis built into the side of a massive, dormant volcano. Its buildings were a fusion of polished obsidian and gleaming chrome, connected by a network of maglev trains that zipped through transparent tubes, offering breathtaking views of the city and the surrounding landscape. It was here, in the heart of Eridor's political and cultural center, that the news of the attack on Mount Argent was received with a mixture of shock and disbelief. The summit, long considered a sacred and inviolable place, had been desecrated, and the name on everyone's lips was Ash Ketchum. In the opulent chambers of the Eridorian Council, a holographic image of Cypher's face, his features now unobscured, glared down at the assembled representatives. He was a man in his late 40s, his face a mask of cold, aristocratic disdain. His silver hair was slicked back, and his eyes, the color of chips of ice, held a chilling lack of empathy. "The rogue agent known as Ash Ketchum has illegally trespassed on sacred ground," Cypher declared, his voice resonating with a carefully modulated authority. "He has allied himself with the separatist factions of the Dragon's Teeth and has attempted to seize control of a power that he cannot possibly comprehend. He is a threat to the stability of Eridor, and he must be stopped." The council members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in elaborately embroidered robes, listened in stony silence. They were the descendants of the ancient noble houses that had ruled Eridor for centuries, their power absolute, their traditions unyielding. One of them, a woman with a severe, hawkish face and eyes that missed nothing, leaned forward. This was Lady Serafina, the matriarch of House Volkov, the most powerful and influential of all the noble houses. "And you, Cypher," she said, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves, "you claim to be acting in the best interests of Eridor. Yet, you are the leader of the Shadow Syndicate, a clandestine organization with a history of questionable activities. Why should we trust you?" Cypher's lips curled into a semblance of a smile. "Because, Lady Serafina, we have a common enemy. Ash Ketchum represents a return to an age of chaos, an age of untamed power. The Aegis was a necessary evil in its time, but that time has passed. The world needs order, it needs control, and the Shadow Syndicate can provide that." He gestured to a series of holographic images that now filled the chamber. They showed Ash, his eyes glowing with that otherworldly silver light, his Pokémon unleashing attacks of devastating power. The images were carefully edited, taken out of context, designed to portray Ash as a reckless, destructive force. "This is the power he wields," Cypher said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The power to command legendary Pokémon. Imagine that power in the hands of a single individual, an individual who answers to no authority, who follows no laws but his own. Is that a risk you are willing to take?" The council members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of fear and intrigue. The idea of controlling legendary Pokémon was a tempting one, a fantasy that had been whispered in the halls of power for generations. The Aegis had always been the obstacle, the guardians who had kept that power out of the hands of mortals. But now, with the Aegis reduced to a single, enigmatic figure, the possibilities seemed endless. Lady Seraphina remained silent, her fingers steepled before her. She was a shrewd and calculating woman, and she knew that Cypher was a serpent, offering a poisoned apple. But she also knew that serpents could be useful, if one knew how to handle them. "We will consider your proposal," she said finally, her voice giving nothing away. "But be warned, Cypher. Eridor does not bow to threats, and we do not suffer fools gladly." The holographic image of Cypher faded, leaving the council chamber in a heavy, contemplative silence. The game had been set, the players had been chosen, and Ash Ketchum, whether he knew it or not, was at the very center of the board. Unaware of the political machinations unfolding in the capital, Ash and Lyra were making their way down the treacherous slopes of Mount Argent. The journey was arduous, the path a narrow, winding track that hugged the side of the mountain. But for Lyra, it was as familiar as the back of her hand. She moved with a confidence and an agility that left Ash in awe, her knowledge of the mountain's hidden paths and secret ways proving invaluable. They spoke little, the shared experience of the battle having forged a bond between them that transcended words. But in the quiet moments, in the shared glances and the easy camaraderie, something was beginning to blossom, a fragile, tentative connection that was both exciting and terrifying. For Ash, it was a new and unfamiliar feeling. His life had been one of constant motion, of battles and challenges, of a relentless pursuit of his dream to become a Pokémon master. He had known friendship, camaraderie, the fierce loyalty of his Pokémon. But this was different. It was a quiet, insistent hum beneath the surface of his thoughts, a warmth that spread through his chest whenever he looked at Lyra. For Lyra, it was a conflict of heart and duty. She was a daughter of the dragon's teeth, her loyalty sworn to her people, her life dedicated to the protection of their traditions. And yet, this outsider, this strange, enigmatic boy with the weight of the world on his shoulders, had stirred something within her, a longing for a life beyond the confines of her clan. They made camp that night in a hidden grotto, a small, natural cavern tucked away behind a cascading waterfall. The air was cool and damp, the only light coming from the gentle glow of a small, bioluminescent fungus that grew on the cavern walls. Ash was tending to his Pokémon, his touch gentle, his voice a low, soothing murmur as he checked them for any injuries. Charizard was resting, his massive form curled up in the back of the grotto, the tip of his tail flame a warm, comforting glow. Pikachu was curled up in Ash's lap, fast asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Espeon was meditating, its gem pulsing with a soft, psychic light. Lyra watched him, a small smile playing on her lips. For all his power, for all his badassery, there was a gentleness to him, a deep and abiding love for his Pokémon that was both endearing and admirable. "You care for them deeply," she said, her voice soft in the quiet of the grotto. Ash looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He wasn't used to people seeing that side of him, the quiet, contemplative Ash that existed beneath the surface of the confident, battle-hardened trainer. "They're my family," he said simply, his hand stroking Pikachu's soft fur. "They've been with me through everything. They're more than just my partners, they're a part of me." He paused, his gaze turning inward, as if he was looking at something far away. "When I was a kid," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I was reckless, impulsive. I rushed into things without thinking, and I made a lot of mistakes. But they never gave up on me. They taught me what it means to be a true partner, what it means to be a true friend." Lyra listened, captivated by this rare glimpse into his past. She had always seen him as the confident, capable leader, the unshakable warrior. But now, she was seeing the boy he had once been, the boy who had dreamed of becoming a Pokémon master, the boy who had learned the hard lessons of life through trial and error. "You've come a long way," she said, her voice filled with a newfound respect. Ash looked at her, his eyes meeting hers in the soft, ethereal light of the grotto. And in that moment, something shifted between them. The barriers they had both erected, the walls of duty and self-preservation, began to crumble. "I still have a long way to go," he admitted, a note of vulnerability in his voice that he rarely allowed anyone to hear. He reached out, his hand gently touching her cheek. Her skin was soft, her pulse a frantic, fluttering bird beneath his fingertips. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the fear and the longing, the duty and the desire. And then, he leaned in, and their lips met. It was a kiss that was both hesitant and hungry, a collision of two worlds, two souls that had been drawn together by the inexorable pull of fate. It was a kiss that tasted of the mountain air, of ozone and ancient stone, of a shared danger and a nascent hope. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless, their hearts pounding in their chests. The unspoken words hung in the air between them, a silent promise of what could be. But the world outside their hidden grotto was not a place of quiet promises and gentle kisses. It was a world of shadows and secrets, of political intrigue and ancient enmities. And the storm that had been gathering on the horizon was about to break. Far away, in the heart of the Shadow Syndicate's hidden fortress, Cypher stood before a massive, holographic map of Eridor. The attack on Mount Argent had been a failure, but it had also been a valuable learning experience. He had underestimated Ash Ketchum, underestimated the power of the Aegis. He would not make that mistake again. "He is more powerful than we anticipated," a voice said from the shadows. It was a woman's voice, cold and precise, with an undercurrent of amusement. A figure emerged from the darkness, a woman with hair the color of blood and eyes that seemed to hold the cold, distant light of the stars. She wore a form-fitting, black uniform that was similar to Cypher's, but hers was adorned with a silver insignia, the mark of the Syndicate's elite intelligence division. This was Seraphina's estranged, power-hungry younger sister, a woman who had abandoned her noble heritage for the shadowy world of espionage and intrigue. Her name was now Cassia. "He has a connection to the legendary Pokémon," Cypher said, his voice tight with frustration. "A connection we have yet to replicate." "Perhaps you are going about it the wrong way," Cassia said, a sly smile playing on her lips. "You are trying to control the power, to dominate it. But the Aegis. They harmonize with it. They become a part of it." She walked over to the holographic map, her fingers tracing the outline of Mount Argent. "You tried to take the mountain," she said, her voice a purr. "But what if you took the boy?" Cypher turned to her, a flicker of interest in his icy eyes. "What are you proposing?" "A trap," Cassia said, her smile widening. "A lure that he cannot resist. Something that will draw him out, away from the protection of the mountains, away from his dragon's teeth allies." She tapped a location on the map, a small, isolated island off the coast of Eridor. "The Isle of Whispers," she said. "According to our sources, it is the location of a dormant shrine, a place of power that is connected to the legendary Pokémon of the sea, Kyogre." Cypher's eyes widened. Kyogre. The bringer of the tides, the creator of the oceans. If we could control that, the world would be ours, Cassia finished, her eyes gleaming with ambition. And Ash Ketchum, the last of the Aegis, will be the key. The plan was set, the trap was laid, and Ash Ketchum, lost in the first, tentative blossoms of a newfound love, was about to walk right into it. The whispers on the summit had been a warning, a prelude to the storm. And now, the storm was coming. As they continued their descent, a sense of unease began to settle over Ash. It was a subtle, nagging feeling at the back of his mind, a dissonant note in the symphony of the world around him. His aura sight, which was usually a clear and vibrant tapestry of energy, was now clouded, filled with a strange, unsettling static. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low and urgent. Lyra, who had been leading the way, stopped and turned to him, her expression a mixture of concern and confusion. "What is it?" "I don't know," Ash admitted, his hand instinctively going to the Pokeball on his belt. "It's like a blind spot. A place where the world's energy is being distorted." He closed his eyes, his consciousness reaching out, trying to pinpoint the source of the disturbance. And then, he found it. A small, insignificant island on the very edge of his perception, a place that seemed to be actively repelling his aura sight, like a black hole in the fabric of reality. "The Isle of Whispers," he breathed, his eyes snapping open. Lyra's blood ran cold. The Isle of Whispers was a place of ill omen, a cursed island that was said to be haunted by the ghosts of those who had been lost at sea. It was a place that even the bravest sailors of the Dragon's Teeth avoided. "Why would you be feeling something from there?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because there's a power there," Ash said, his voice grim. "A power that is being corrupted, twisted." He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this was the work of the Shadow Syndicate. They had set a trap, a lure. And he was the intended prey. He looked at Lyra, at the fear and the resolve in her eyes. He knew that he had to go, that he couldn't ignore this threat. The Aegis was a shield, and a shield could not shy away from the coming blow. "I have to go," he said, his voice firm. "You can't," Lyra protested, her hand grabbing his arm. "It's a trap, Ash. You know it is." "I know," he said, his voice softening. "But I also know that if I don't go, they will succeed in whatever they are planning. And the consequences of that. They're unthinkable." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for her to understand. "This is my fight, Lyra. My responsibility." She wanted to argue, to scream, to tell him that he was being a fool. But she saw the look in his eyes, the unshakable resolve, the quiet determination that was so much a part of who he was. And she knew that she couldn't stop him. But she also knew that she couldn't let him go alone. "Then I'm coming with you," she said, her voice ringing with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. Ash looked at her, a mixture of surprise and gratitude in his eyes. He had been prepared to face this alone, to bear this burden on his own. But now, as he looked at the woman standing before him, her hand still holding his, he knew that he was no longer alone. Together, they would face the coming storm. Together, they would walk into the heart of the trap, and together, they would show the Shadow Syndicate the true power of the Aegis. The Isle of Whispers was a place of jagged cliffs and churning, black waters. A perpetual, unnatural storm raged around it, the sky a bruised, angry purple. The air was thick with the scent of salt and decay, and a low, mournful wail seemed to emanate from the very rocks themselves, the whispers of the lost souls that gave the island its name. Ash and Lyra arrived on the back of Charizard, the mighty fire type, a beacon of warmth and defiance in the cold, oppressive atmosphere. They landed on a narrow, rocky beach, the waves crashing against the shore with a relentless, hungry fury. "This place feels wrong," Lyra said, her hand instinctively going to the daggers at her thighs. "It is," Ash agreed, his eyes scanning the island. "The energy here is sick. It's like a wound in the world." They made their way inland, the path a treacherous, winding track that led up the side of a massive, dormant volcano. The ground was littered with the fossilized remains of ancient Pokémon, their skeletal forms a grim reminder of the island's dark past. As they neared the summit, they came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing was a shrine, a crumbling, ancient structure made of a strange, black stone that seemed to absorb the light. The shrine was pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy, the source of the corruption that Ash had sensed. And standing before the shrine was Cassia. She turned to them, a slow, predatory smile spreading across her face. She was flanked by a squad of elite shadow grunts, their weapons trained on Ash and Lyra. "Ash Ketchum," she said, her voice a seductive purr. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come." "I'm not here for a social call," Ash said, his voice cold and hard. "What have you done to this place?" Cassia laughed, a sound that was both beautiful and chilling. "I have awakened it," she said, gesturing to the shrine. "This is a place of power, a conduit to the legendary Pokémon, Kyogre. And with this, we will control the very oceans themselves." She held up a device, a small, black orb that pulsed with the same dark energy as the shrine. "The Shadow Amplifier," she said. "A little invention of ours. It enhances a Pokémon's natural power, but at a cost. It closes their heart, severs their connection to the world around them. It turns them into a living weapon." "You're insane," Lyra spat, her eyes flashing with a righteous fury. "Insanity is a matter of perspective," Cassia replied, her smile never faltering. "Some would say that trying to protect a world that is destined for chaos is a form of insanity." She turned her attention back to Ash. "But you are different. You have a connection to the legendary Pokémon that we have yet to understand. And that is why you are here. You are going to help us." "I'll never help you," Ash said, his voice a low growl. "Oh, I think you will," Cassia said, her eyes gleaming with a cruel amusement. She snapped her fingers, and from behind the shrine, two of her grunts emerged, dragging a struggling figure between them. It was a young girl, no older than 10, her eyes wide with terror. She was one of the dragon's teeth, her silver hair and traditional clothing unmistakable. Lyra gasped, her face draining of color. "Lena. A little insurance policy," Cassia said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "We found her wandering the lower slopes of the mountain. A bit of a stray, it seems." She gestured to the shrine. Now, Mr. Ketchum. You will use your connection to the legendary Pokémon to activate the shrine. You will channel your power into it, and you will give us control of Kyogre, if you refuse. She let the threat hang in the air, a cold, unspoken promise of violence. Ash looked at the terrified girl, at the desperation in Lyra's eyes. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making. He had walked into the lion's den, and now, the lions were demanding their price. But Ash Ketchum was not a man who bowed to threats. He was not a man who surrendered to despair. He was the Aegis, the shield of the world. And he would not be broken. He looked at Cassia, a cold, hard glint in his eyes. You've made a mistake, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Oh, Cassia said, raising an eyebrow, and what mistake is that? You've underestimated me, Ash said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. And you've underestimated my family. He closed his eyes, his consciousness reaching out, not to the corrupted shrine, not to the dormant power of Kyogre, but to the one Pokémon that he knew would always answer his call, no matter the distance, no matter the odds. He reached out to his brother, and in the heart of the storm, in the churning, black waters that surrounded the Isle of Whispers, something began to stir. A massive, shadowy form, its eyes burning with a righteous fury. Lugia had answered the call. The battle for the Isle of Whispers was about to begin. The fate of the world hung in the balance. And Ash Ketchum, the last of the Aegis, was ready to fight. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The serpents gambit the air on the Isle of Whispers, thick and cloying with despair only moments before, fractured. It was not a sound but a sensation, a pressure change that made ears pop and the fine hairs on one's arms stand erect. The perpetual, bruised purple storm that choked the sky did not simply part. It was torn asunder as if by an invisible, celestial hand. A pillar of incandescent silver light plunged from the newly revealed heavens, striking the turbulent black water 100 yards from the shore. For a breathtaking second, there was only light and the deafening silence that follows a thunderclap. Then, the sea erupted. A colossal waterspout, a liquid vortex of impossible scale, surged toward the sky, and from its heart, a form of divine grace and terrifying power emerged. Wings, vast and white as polished ivory, unfurled to their full, magnificent span, each feather tipped with a shimmering blade like silver. They did not so much beat the air as commanded, the storm itself bending to their will. A long, serpentine neck of impossible elegance rose from the waves, culminating in a head adorned with twin, deep blue dorsal plates that swept back like a crown. Eyes, ancient and deep as the ocean floor, blazed with a righteous, intelligent fury. This was not merely a Pokémon. It was a living myth, a force of nature given form. This was Lugia, the guardian of the seas, and it had answered its brother's call. Cassia's predatory smile froze, melting into a mask of stunned disbelief. The shadow grunts took an involuntary step back, their high-tech weaponry suddenly feeling like children's toys against the manifestation of a god. Impossible, Cassia breathed, her voice losing its seductive purr, replaced by a sharp, brittle edge. Our intelligence said you were on Mount Argent. How? Ash didn't answer. A bond forged in the crucible of a world-saving prophecy and tempered through years of silent communion needed no words. He felt Lugia's presence not as an external force, but as an echo within his own soul, a surge of calm, oceanic power that steadied his racing heart and sharpened his focus to a razor's edge. The silver light that had faded from his eyes after the battle on the summit returned, brighter, purer, a perfect mirror of the divine energy radiating from the creature before him. Less than they defile a sacred place, Ash. They seek to enslave another of our kind. This transgression will not stand. Greater than Lugia's voice resonated, not in Ash's ears, but directly in his mind. A melody of ancient power, deep and resonant as a whale song. Less than I know, greater than Ash projected back, his thoughts a seamless flow of intent. Less than they are using the shrine to channel a corrupting energy. The device, the black orb Cassia holds, is the key. But they have a hostage. Greater than he sent a fleeting mental image of Lena, terrified and small. Lugia's eyes narrowed, the psychic message received and understood in an instant. A low, guttural growl, the sound of the abyssal depths given voice, rumbled across the island. The very rock beneath their feet vibrated in sympathetic harmony. Do not stand there gawking, Cassia shrieked, her composure shattering. Fire! Fire everything at that beast. Overwhelm it. The shadow grunts, jolted from their stupor, obeyed. A volley of crackling, dark energy beams lanced through the air, converging on Lugia. It was like throwing pebbles at a tidal wave. With a movement too graceful for its immense size, Lugia raised one of its massive wings. A shimmering, translucent barrier of psychic energy materialized before it, the dark energy blasts splashing harmlessly against its surface like rain against a windowpane. Lyra, now, Ash's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and clear. It was all the signal she needed. While every eye was fixed on the divine spectacle in the bay, Lyra had already melted into the shadows at the edge of the clearing. She moved with the wind, a phantom in the gloom, her indigo suit blending perfectly with the dark, volcanic rock. Her daggers, Fang, and Talon, were in her hands, their carved hilts cool and familiar against her palms. The world narrowed to a series of objectives. 2 grunts holding Lena, 10 more forming a perimeter, Cassia at the center. Her breath was a slow, controlled rhythm, her heartbeat a steady drum. The dance of the dragon's teeth was not just a fighting style, it was a state of being. She flowed around a rock outcropping, her steps silent on the gravel. The first grunt was focused entirely on Lugia, his weapon raised. Lyra was on him in a flash. Not a killing blow, but a precise, disabling strike. The pommel of Fang connected sharply with the nerve cluster at the base of his neck. He crumpled without a sound. 1 down. Back in the clearing, the battle had escalated into a symphony of elemental chaos. Charizard, flank them. Use the cliffs for cover. Pikachu, disrupt their tech. Ash commanded, a true battlefield general. Charizard roared his ascent, launching into the air with a powerful beat of his leathery wings. He didn't charge head-on but instead soared high, using the jagged volcanic spires as cover, his presence a constant, fiery threat from above. Pikachu became a yellow blur, a lightning strike given legs. He darted between the grunt's feet, too fast to track, his small body a conduit for precise electrical discharges. Sparks flew as he short-circuited their energy packs, their weapons sputtering and dying with metallic whimpers. Cassia, seeing her foot soldiers being dismantled with contemptuous ease, snarled in frustration. She turned her attention back to the shrine, holding the shadow amplifier aloft. You want power, Ketchum? I'll show you power. She slammed the orb into a recess on the dark stone altar. The entire island groaned in protest. The malevolent energy intensified tenfold, a tide of pure darkness that washed over the clearing. The air grew cold, and the whispers that gave the island its name rose to a frantic, agonizing scream. Dark tendrils of energy erupted from the shrine, lashing out like sentient whips. Lugia let out a cry of pain as one of the tendrils struck it, sizzling against its divine form. The dark energy was anathema to its pure nature. Less than the shrine is fighting back, it's drawing power from the island's trauma. Greater than Lugia projected, its mental voice strained. Less than we don't fight the shrine, we cleanse it. Aeroblast. Aim for the orb, greater than Ash directed. Lugia opened its maw, and a vortex of swirling, high-pressure air began to form. It was a controlled hurricane, a focused blast of pure, elemental force. But the dark tendrils were relentless, lashing out, forcing Lugia to remain on the defensive, using its psychic barriers to fend them off. Meanwhile, hidden in a small, cleverly concealed bunker carved into the volcano's side, a young woman with honey blonde hair tied in a practical ponytail watched the chaos unfold on a series of monitors. Her blue eyes, wide and intelligent, were filled with a mixture of terror and dawning resolve. This was Serena, the unwilling architect of the Syndicate's latest monstrosity. She had been tasked with monitoring the Shadow Amplifier, a device born from her own revolutionary research into Pokémon energy signatures, now twisted into a tool of subjugation. The Syndicate had her parents, holding them in a secure, comfortable location, a gilded cage that was a prison nonetheless. For months, she had complied, burying her conscience under a mountain of complex equations and technical schematics. But seeing that little girl, Lena, being used as a human shield had cracked the dam of her denial. And now, witnessing the bond between Ash and Lugia. It was everything her research had pointed to, the ultimate expression of harmony between humans and Pokémon, a perfect, symbiotic flow of energy. It was beautiful. And it was the polar opposite of the ugly, parasitic drain her own creation was inflicting upon the island. Her fingers flew across a holographic console, her expression hardening from fear into a steely determination. They had made a mistake. They had brought her to the field. And her field was a battlefield they couldn't possibly comprehend. "You wanted a weapon," Serena whispered to the monitors, her voice trembling but firm. "You should have known a weapon can be aimed." She bypassed the primary command prompts, diving deep into the amplifier's root code, the digital pathways she herself had designed. Encryptions, firewalls. They were her own creations, and she danced through them with the ease of a master. A tense minute passed. A proximity alert flashed red on her screen. A guard was approaching her bunker. Time was running out. With a final, decisive keystroke, she found what she was looking for: the energy regulation protocols. The amplifier was designed to draw power, but it also needed to vent excess energy to prevent a catastrophic overload. She disabled all the safety overrides and rerouted the entire venting system, directing it not outwards, but back into the amplifier's core matrix. A feedback loop. A digital serpent eating its own tail. Outside, Lyra saw her chance. The grunts holding Lena were distracted, their attention torn between the god in the sea and the fiery demon in the sky. Lyra moved. She was a whisper of motion, a fleeting shadow. She disarmed the first grunt with a deft twist of her dagger, sending his weapon flying. The second turned, his eyes wide, but he was too slow. Lyra's foot swept his legs out from under him, and she was already moving, scooping the terrified Lena into her arms and spiriting her away into the safety of the rocks before the grunt even hit the ground. "You're safe now," Lyra murmured, her voice, usually so calm and measured, filled with a fierce, protective warmth. At that exact moment, Serena's sabotage took effect. The shadow amplifier, instead of pulsing with a steady, malevolent rhythm, began to shudder violently. The dark energy flowing from it flickered, turning a sickly, unstable green. Ash, his aura sight attuned to the flow of energy, felt the shift instantly. It was a discordant, screaming note in the symphony of chaos. A vulnerability. Less than Lugia, now. Full power. The core is unstable. Greater than Lugia seized the opportunity. The dark tendrils, weakened by the fluctuating power source, faltered. With a mighty roar that was a prayer and a war cry in one, Lugia unleashed its attack. The Aeroblast, no longer a controlled vortex but a raw, untamed torrent of elemental fury, slammed into the shrine. The impact was cataclysmic. For a moment, the dark energy of the amplifier and the pure energy of the Aeroblast fought for dominance, a violent collision of light and shadow. Then, Serena's feedback loop kicked in. The amplifier, unable to vent the sudden, massive influx of power, turned on itself. With a deafening, high-pitched shriek, the black orb shattered. A wave of pure, white gold energy erupted from the shrine, not an explosion of force, but of purification. The dark, corrupting aura that had plagued the island for so long was vaporized, cleansed in a baptism of divine light. The screams of the lost souls faded, replaced by a gentle, sighing peace. The shadow grunts were thrown back, their dark energy weapons overloaded and exploding in showers of sparks, rendering them unconscious. The perpetual storm clouds overhead dissolved, revealing a sky of brilliant, crystalline blue. Sunlight, warm and gentle, touched the Isle of Whispers for the first time in centuries. In the ensuing chaos, Cassia moved with the ruthless efficiency of a survivor. While Ash's attention was on the cleansing of the shrine, she had already calculated her losses and deemed the operation a failure. She pressed a button on her gauntlet, and a cloaked, silent aircraft descended from the clouds behind the volcano. "This isn't over, Ketchum," she snarled, her voice a low promise of future vengeance. Her cold eyes locked with his for a moment, a silent declaration of a war that had just begun. And then, she was gone, swallowed by the shadows, leaving her defeated forces behind. As the golden light faded, an almost preternatural silence fell over the island. The air was clean, fresh, filled with the scent of salt and rain-washed stone. The malevolent whispers were gone. Charizard landed with a ground-shaking thud, nudging Ash gently with his snout. Pikachu scampered up his arm, chirping with relief. Lyra emerged from the rocks, the now calm Lena holding tightly to her hand. It was then that a hidden door hissed open in the side of the volcano, and Serena emerged, blinking in the unfamiliar sunlight. She looked at the scene before her, the cleansed shrine, the unconscious grunts, the legendary hero with his mythical Pokémon, and took a deep, shuddering breath. Ash turned his attention to her, his silver-lit eyes softening as he saw the fear and hope warring in her expression. "You're the one who did that," he said. It wasn't a question. He had felt her intervention, a small, brilliant spark of defiance in the overwhelming darkness. Serena flinched, expecting anger, accusation. They forced me. My parents. They have my parents. I designed the core systems, but I never wanted this." The words tumbled out of her, a torrent of guilt and fear. Lyra stepped forward, her hand resting protectively on Lena's shoulder, her gaze sharp and suspicious. "You worked for them. You built the weapon that nearly destroyed this island and enslaved a legendary. How can we trust you?" Her voice was not cruel, but it was hard, the voice of a warrior who had seen too much betrayal. It was a fair question, and Ash didn't dismiss it. He turned his gaze from Serena to Lyra, his expression conveying a deep understanding of her caution. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging her concern. Then he looked back at Serena, and she saw not judgment, but a profound and startling empathy in his eyes. "You could have stayed hidden," Ash said, his voice calm and steady. "You could have escaped with Kashia. But you didn't. You chose to fight back, to do the right thing, even when it was hard. That's a choice that takes courage." He took a step closer. "My name is Ash. We're going to get your parents back." Serena stared at him, speechless. She had expected to be treated as a prisoner, a collaborator. Instead, this boy, this wielder of legends, was offering her not just amnesty, but help. Hope, a feeling she had long since abandoned, began to blossom in her chest. She was captivated, not by the raw power he commanded, but by the quiet strength of his character, the unwavering moral compass that guided him. Lugia, its task complete, gave a final, resonant cry, a sound of farewell and approval. It dipped its head to Ash in a gesture of profound respect, then turned and dove back into the now sparkling blue waters, disappearing into the depths. Serena finally found her voice. "There's more you need to know," she said, her tone urgent. "The Shadow Amplifier. It was just a prototype. A proof of concept. Their real goal is something they call Project Chimera." Ash's attention sharpened. Project Chimera? A program to synthesize and control the powers of multiple legendary Pokémon at once, Serena explained, her eyes dark with the memory of the schematics she had been forced to design. "They're not just trying to capture them. They're trying to dissect their power, to create a stable, controllable fusion. They have other labs, other teams. They're targeting nexus points all over the world, places where the veil is thin, where legendary Pokémon slumber." The stakes, already impossibly high, had just been raised to a whole new level. This wasn't just about protecting individual Pokémon anymore. This was about preventing the very fabric of their world's power from being unraveled and rewoven into a weapon of unimaginable destruction. A cool sea breeze washed over the island, carrying the scent of a new beginning. The battle was won, but the war had just been declared. Ash looked at his companions. At Pikachu, his oldest and truest friend. At Charizard, his steadfast powerhouse. At Lyra, the fierce warrior of the mountains who had stood by his side without hesitation. And at Serena, the brilliant scientist who had found her courage in the heart of the storm, a new and unexpected ally. They were an unlikely group, a trainer, a warrior, and a scientist, bound together by a common enemy and a shared hope. Standing on the shores of the cleansed Isle of Whispers, with the unconscious forms of the Shadow Syndicate's grunts scattered behind them and the vast, open ocean before them, they knew their journey was just beginning. The serpent, Kashia, had escaped, and the head of the beast, the enigmatic leader of the Shadow Syndicate, remained hidden. Project Chimera was active, and the world was in peril. Ash met Lyra's gaze, then Serena's. He saw the challenges that lay ahead reflected in their eyes, but he also saw determination, strength, and the nascent flicker of a powerful alliance. The path forward was fraught with danger, but for the first time in a long time, he did not feel like he was walking it alone. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Wyverns Rest. The wind howled a mournful dirge as they ascended, a stark contrast to the preternatural peace that had settled over the Isle of Whispers. Charizard's powerful wings beat a steady, rhythmic tattoo against the turbulent air, a living engine of fire and muscle carrying them away from the scene of their victory. Ash, seated just behind Charizard's neck, felt the familiar, comforting warmth of his partner's inner flame against his chest. Behind him, Lyra held a now sleeping Lena, the child's small body curled against her for warmth and security, her face finally free from the grip of terror. Bringing up the rear was Serena, her posture rigid, her hands gripping the thick hide of Charizard's back with a white-knuckled intensity that bespoke her unfamiliarity with this mode of transport. She was a creature of sterile labs and climate-controlled bunkers. The raw, untamed power of the open sky was a terrifying, exhilarating new reality. The unconscious forms of the shadow grunts were secured in a high-tensile cargo net that trailed just below them, a grim reminder of the battle won and the larger war that loomed. A tense silence, thick with unspoken thoughts, stretched between them. Lyra's focus was entirely on the child in her arms, but Ash could feel the waves of suspicion rolling off her whenever her gaze flickered towards Serena. To Lyra, the scientist was an unknown variable, a serpent shed from the skin of their enemy. For Serena, the silence was a crushing weight of guilt and uncertainty. She had betrayed her captors, yes, but her hands were far from clean. The ghosts of her complicity were unwelcome passengers on their flight. Ash acted as the fulcrum, the calm center upon which their fragile alliance was balanced. He didn't press for conversation, allowing the silence to serve its purpose, to let the adrenaline of battle subside and the reality of their situation sink in. His mind, however, was a whirlwind of activity, processing Serena's revelation. Project Chimera. The name itself was a perversion, an affront to the natural order. It wasn't just about capture anymore, it was about vivisection, about tearing the divine power of the legendaries apart and stitching it back together into a monstrous, controllable whole. The thought sent a chill colder than the high-altitude wind down his spine. "We can't take them to Aethelgard," Lyra's voice cut through the wind, sharp and decisive. "The council is compromised. Cypher's influence runs deeper than we know, and they wouldn't know what to do with her." A subtle nod towards Serena. They would see her only as a syndicate agent. "I agree," Ash said, turning his head slightly to be heard over the rush of air. "We need a secure location. A place to regroup and analyze the data Serena has. A place off the grid." "I know a place," Lyra said, a note of proprietary pride in her voice. "Wyvern's Rest, my home." As dawn bled across the eastern horizon, painting the underbellies of the clouds in hues of rose and gold, their destination came into view. It was not a city, nor a village in the conventional sense. It was a marvel of symbiotic architecture, a settlement carved directly into the sheer, granite face of a colossal cliff that stretched for miles, its peak lost in the clouds. This was the hidden sanctuary of the Dragon's Teeth clan. Wyvern's Rest was a vertical world. Homes, forges, and communal halls were hewn from the living rock, their balconies and windows offering breathtaking, vertiginous views of the valley thousands of feet below. A network of sturdy rope bridges, swaying gently in the wind, connected the different levels. The entire settlement was designed to mimic the form of a coiled dragon, its head, the chieftain's hall at the highest point, its tail disappearing into a thick forest at the cliff's base. The air hummed with a vibrant, living energy. The clang of a blacksmith's hammer echoed from a forge whose chimney was the nostril of a carved dragonite head. The sharp, guttural sounds of the draconic tongue, a language of clicks and deep vowel sounds, carried on the wind. Clan members, clad in durable leathers and furs, moved with a mountain-bred agility, often alongside their Pokémon partners. Garchomps basking on sun-drenched ledges, Flygons soaring on updrafts, their iridescent wings catching the morning light. Charizard, recognizing the familiar territory, let out a triumphant roar that was answered by a chorus of challenges and greetings from the Pokémon of the rest. He landed gracefully on the main receiving platform, a wide, flat expanse of rock before the entrance to the Great Hall. The moment they touched down, they were surrounded. Warriors of the Dragon's Teeth, men and women with fierce, intelligent eyes and weapons held at a ready but not overtly hostile posture, formed a perimeter. Their gazes were sharp, analytical, lingering on the unconscious grunts in the net and, most pointedly, on the unfamiliar face of Serena. An imposing figure strode forward from the great hall. He was a man forged from the mountain itself, his broad shoulders and powerful build speaking of a life of hardship and battle. His long, silver hair, the same shade as Lyra's, was braided with beads of amber and obsidian. His face was a roadmap of scars and laugh lines, and his eyes, a piercing sky blue, held the weight of a leader's responsibility. This was Kale, chieftain of the Dragon's Teeth, and Lyra's father. "Father," Lyra said, dismounting with a grace that belied her exhaustion, She presented the now awake but still groggy Lena to her waiting parents, who rushed forward with cries of relief. Cale's stern expression softened for a fraction of a second as he watched the reunion, then his gaze hardened as it fell upon Ash, and then Serena. "You return from the sacred mountain with a storm at your back, Ketchum," he rumbled, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates. "And you have brought an outsider with the stench of the syndicate upon her." Serena flinched, instinctively taking a step back, her intellectual brilliance no defense against the raw, intimidating presence of the clan chieftain. "She is with me," Ash said, his voice calm but unyielding. He slid from Charizard's back, standing his ground before Cale, meeting his gaze without a hint of fear. "She chose to stand against the syndicate. She is the reason we were victorious, and the reason your clan's child is safe." The directness of the statement gave Cale pause. He had expected deference, perhaps justification. He had not expected this young man to stand before him as an equal, to make a declaration with the force of an established fact. He studied Ash, his gaze sweeping over the boy's worn but practical gear, the quiet confidence in his posture, the unwavering loyalty in Pikachu's stance on his shoulder. He saw not the reckless challenger he had half expected, but a seasoned commander. "My daughter trusts you," Cale stated, turning his piercing gaze to Lyra. "That is the only reason you are not being held in the deepest cells of this mountain. Explain." In the chieftain's hall, a vast cavern lit by the soft, warm glow of crystal clusters and the roaring fire in a central hearth, the story unfolded. Lyra recounted the battle on the summit, her words painting a vivid picture of Ash's strategic mind and his astonishing connection to the mountain. Then, Ash took over, describing the trap on the Isle of Whispers, Cashia's cruelty, and Lugia's divine intervention. Finally, Serena, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with every word, explained her role, the coercion, and the existence of Project Chimera. She projected a holographic image from a datachip she had managed to palm during her escape. Complex equations, energy readings, and horrifying biological schematics filled the air. "They seek to unmake the gods and wear their skins as armor," Cale murmured, his expression grim as he stared at the data. "An old arrogance. One that has led to ruin time and time again." He declared that the grunts would be interrogated and that Serena would be given protected quarters, a guest but also a prisoner until her story could be fully verified. It was a harsh but pragmatic decision, and one Ash understood. Trust had to be earned, and they were still strangers here. The days that followed were a period of tense adjustment. Lyra, back in her own world, was transformed. She was no longer just Ash's companion, but a respected leader in her own right. He saw her directing patrols, training young warriors in the fluid, deadly dance of their combat style, her voice carrying an authority he had not heard before. It created a subtle, unspoken distance between them. The intimacy of the grotto, the shared desperation of the island, felt like a memory from another life. Seeking to bridge that gap and prove his own worth to her people, Ash requested a spar. Not a Pokemon battle, but a personal one. Cale, intrigued, granted it. His opponent was Drayvon, the clan's reigning champion, a mountain of a man with a wild beard and a pair of wickedly curved blades. The fight took place in the Dragon's Maw, a circular training arena surrounded by onlookers. Drayvon was all power and aggression, his blades a whirlwind of steel. Ash, unarmed, was his polar opposite. He didn't meet force with force. He flowed. He used the martial arts Lyra had taught him, a dance of evasion and misdirection, combined with the street-smart instincts of 1,000 battles. He ducked, weaved, and redirected Drayvon's momentum, using the bigger man's strength against him. The clan watched, their initial skepticism turning to murmurs of surprise, then respect. Ash wasn't just a trainer, he was a warrior in his own right. He lost, in the end, disarmed by a clever feint from the more experienced Drayvon, but he had earned his victory in the court of opinion. He had shown them he was not afraid to bleed. Later that evening, nursing a bruised rib, Ash found Serena in a small alcove overlooking the valley. She was poring over her datachip, her face illuminated by the holographic glow. "Find anything?" he asked, leaning against the rock wall. "They're moving faster than I thought," she said, her voice heavy with worry. "The energy signatures. They're not just targeting dormant legendaries. They're looking for conduits, places where the world's natural energy is so concentrated that it can be used as a power source for their experiments. Like the shrine on the island, but on a much larger scale." Places like Mount Argent, Ash surmised. Exactly, Serena confirmed. And I think I've found their next target. A massive geothermal vent deep beneath the Hoenn region. The energy readings are off the charts. It's a place where the planet's lifeblood is close to the surface. It's connected, in theory, to the chamber where Groudon slumbers. She looked up at him, her blue eyes reflecting the complex data streams. Why do you do it, Ash? What drives you to take on all of this? Ash was quiet for a moment, his gaze lost in the vast expanse of the valley below. When I was a kid, I saw a flock of Spearow attack a Pokémon. I shielded it with my own body. It was stupid, reckless. But in that moment, I understood something. Being a master isn't about having the strongest Pokémon. It's about having the strongest bond. It's about being willing to stand between them in the storm. He looked back at her. The Syndicate wants to turn that bond into a weapon. They want to turn partners into tools. I can't let that happen. Someone has to be the shield. Serena was mesmerized. In the Syndicate labs, she had worked with men and women of genius intellect, but their brilliance was cold, clinical, divorced from any sense of morality. Ash's conviction was a living thing, a warm, powerful force. It was the missing variable in all her equations. In that moment, her admiration for him crystallized into something deeper, a profound and compelling attraction to the sheer, unshakable integrity of the man before her. Armed with this new information, and with the respect Ash had earned, Lyra convinced her father to convene the Council of Elders. They gathered in the heart of the mountain, a sacred cavern where the rock walls were embedded with the fossilized remains of ancient dragon Pokémon. The chamber was lit by the controlled flames of a massive Hydreigon, the clan's oldest and most respected Pokémon, its 3 heads watching the proceedings with ancient, intelligent eyes. Ash stood before the 5 elders, their faces like carved granite, and made his case. He did not command or demand. He spoke of the balance, of the Aegis's duty, and of the threat Project Chimera posed to both the human and Pokémon worlds. Then, Serena stepped forward. Finding a new confidence in Ash's belief in her, she presented her data with a clarity and precision that left the elders in stunned silence. She laid out the science behind the Syndicate's plan, her intellect a weapon as potent as any blade. Tradition dictates we defend our own borders, one elder rasped, his voice dry as old parchment. This is not our fight. The Syndicate made it our fight when they desecrated Mount Argent and stole one of our children, Kale's voice boomed, cutting through the dissent. He had seen enough. He had tested the boy and found him worthy. He had listened to the outsider and found her words held the weight of truth. He turned to Ash. The dragon's teeth will not ride to war in a foreign land. But we will not stand idle. We will give you aid, supplies, information, and a guide. On Kale's signal, a figure stepped forward from the shadows behind the elders' thrones. The assembled clan members gasped. The woman was not one of them. She was tall and poised, with long, blonde hair that fell like a silken waterfall over one eye. She wore the practical attire of an archaeologist, but carried herself with the regal confidence of a queen. At her side, a Garchomp stood with a quiet, menacing stillness, a prominent scar over its left eye. Cynthia, Kale said by way of introduction. A scholar from the Sinnoh region. She came to us seeking knowledge of the ancient myths, but her own research into recent energy anomalies has led her to the same conclusion as yours. Cynthia stepped into the firelight, her gray eyes sweeping over the group. They were analytical, intelligent, and missed nothing. She gave a nod to Serena, a sign of intellectual respect. Her gaze lingered on Lyra, acknowledging a fellow warrior. Then her eyes settled on Ash. She had heard the stories whispered through the clan. Of his battle on the summit, his bond with a legendary, his spar with Draven. She saw not a boy, but a tactical and spiritual anomaly, a puzzle that defied all conventional understanding of Pokémon trainers. A faint, intriguing smile touched her lips. Your Project Chimera aligns with my research into the degradation of historic sites across the globe, Cynthia stated, her voice calm and melodic, yet carrying an unshakable authority. Small shrines, ancient temples, all showing signs of a parasitic energy drain. It seems your syndicate has been busy. The geothermal vent in Hoenn is a logical next target. I was already planning an expedition. It seems we now have a shared destination. The introduction of this new, powerful player shifted the very atmosphere in the cavern. Serena found an immediate intellectual equal. Lyra, however, felt a prickle of something she couldn't quite name. a nascent rivalry, the recognition of another queen stepping onto the board. The decision was made. They would leave for Hoenn at first light. Kael provided them with one of the clan's most valuable assets. A prototype stealth transport, a sleek, silent craft modeled after a Salamence, capable of incredible speed and off-the-grid travel. As they prepared for departure on the main platform, the pre-dawn air cold and sharp, Lyra approached Ashe. The distance that had grown between them in the structured world of her clan seemed to melt away in the quiet intimacy of the moment. "You have the heart of a dragon, Ashe Ketchum," she said softly, placing a hand on his arm. "To stand before my father and the elders. To fight Draven. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Ashe replied, his voice equally quiet, his gaze meeting hers. "I had to show them, and you. That I am more than just the Aegis. That I'm worthy of the trust you've placed in me." The unspoken words hung between them, a promise of something more, something that would have to wait. The fate of the world was a demanding chaperone. He turned to survey his new team. Pikachu was already on the transport's ramp, eagerly sniffing the air. Lyra, her choice made, stood ready, her loyalty no longer just to her clan, but to the man and the mission he represented. Serena, armed with her data and a newfound purpose, was running a pre-flight diagnostic with the focus of a master craftsman. And Cynthia, the brilliant and enigmatic scholar champion, watched them all with those keen, analytical eyes, a walking library of ancient lore and modern strategy. An Aegis, a warrior, a scientist, and a scholar. An unlikely fellowship, bound for the fiery heart of the world to stop a shadow that threatened to consume it all. Ashe took a final look at the majestic, vertical world of Wyvern's Rest, then stepped onto the ramp of the transport. The door hissed shut, and with a whisper of silent engines, the craft lifted into the sky, a silver dart against the rising sun, heading south. Towards Hoenn. Towards Groudon. Towards the fire. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The fire beneath the Wyvern sliced through the humid, superheated air of Hoenn with the silence of a hunting Noivern. Inside, the chill of the high atmosphere was a rapidly fading memory, replaced by a thick, oppressive heat that seemed to press in from all sides. Below them, the landscape was a violent, beautiful tapestry of emerald jungle, scarred by the angry red and black of ancient lava flows. The peak of Mount Chimney fumed lazily in the distance, a constant, smoldering reminder of the immense power churning just beneath the world's fragile crust. They landed in a secluded jungle clearing, the transport's stealth technology rendering it a mere shimmer in the heat haze before its camouflage systems engaged, making it indistinguishable from the surrounding rock face. The moment the ramp hissed open, the environment assaulted them. The air was a cocktail of sulfur, wet earth, and blossoming tropical flowers. A scent both fertile and dangerous. The cacophony of the jungle's unseen inhabitants was a living wall of sound. Serena, stepping onto the spongy ground, immediately began tapping at the holographic interface on her wrist, her expression a mask of professional focus. Atmospheric temperature is 38 degrees Celsius, humidity at 94%. Barometric pressure is stable, but I'm detecting faint, rhythmic seismic tremors. They're too regular to be natural. "The planet's heartbeat," Cynthia murmured, her gray eyes sweeping the landscape. She seemed unfazed by the heat, her poise as immaculate as it was in the frozen halls of Wyvern's Rest. Or perhaps, its troubled sleep. Groudon is not merely a creature that lives within the earth. In a very real sense, it is the earth. The continents, the mountains. They are the result of its slumbering form shifting over eons. Lyra, by contrast, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Her leathers, designed for the cold, dry air of the mountains, were already starting to cling to her. She scanned the dense, unfamiliar foliage with a warrior's distrust. This place is all shadow and fang. In the mountains, you can see your enemy from a mile away. Here. She let the sentence hang, her hand resting on the hilt of a dagger. "We're all out of our element here," Ashe said, his voice cutting through the tension. He had already adapted, his posture relaxed but alert, his senses extended. His aura sight painted the jungle in a riot of vibrant life signatures, a stark contrast to the cold, slow pulse of the mountains. "That's why we stick to the plan. Serena, what have you got on the target?" Serena projected a 3D schematic between them. It depicted a sprawling industrial complex nestled in a volcanic caldera a few clicks away. The H-8 geothermal plant. Publicly, it's a joint venture with the Devon Corporation, a flagship project for clean energy. But my data shows a massive, undeclared power drain in a secondary construction deep underground, shielded from all conventional scans. That's their real lab. That's Project Chimera's beachhead. A fortress, Lyra observed, her eyes narrowing at the schematic's depiction of perimeter fences, sensor towers, and automated defense turrets. A fortress with a leaky basement, Cynthia countered, tapping a section of the hologram. These are old lava tubes, remnants of Mount Chimney's last major eruption. According to geological surveys, several run directly beneath the H-8 facility. They're unstable, unmapped, and therefore, likely unmonitored. A dragon's path. The plan coalesced, each member contributing their expertise. Serena would be their eyes and ears, hacking into the plant's security network from the safety of the Wyvern. Cynthia would navigate them through the treacherous lava tubes. Lyra would be their point woman, dealing with any physical threats they encountered with lethal silence. And Ash, with Pikachu, would be the spearhead, his aura sight their only way to perceive the Syndicate's own hidden energy systems and guard patrols. The journey through the jungle was a tense affair, a humid, claustrophobic trek through a world that felt alien and alive. As they reached the designated lava tube entrance, a jagged, black maw in the earth that exhaled a constant, hellish heat, the true nature of their mission sank in. They were descending into the planet's furnace. The tunnels were a labyrinth of obsidian-sharp rock and narrow, crumbling ledges over chasms that glowed with a faint, cherry-red light from the immense heat below. The air was thin, tasting of scorched minerals. They moved in single file, their only light the soft glow of Serena's holographic map and the occasional, reassuring spark from Pikachu's cheeks. Two guards approaching the junction ahead, Ash's voice was a low whisper that carried in the tight confines. Aura signatures are calm. They're on a routine patrol. Lyra, at the front, didn't need another word. She flattened herself into a recess in the rock, a predator waiting in the dark. As the two Syndicate grunts rounded the corner, their flashlights cutting uselessly into the oppressive darkness, Lyra moved. She was a blur of motion, a striking serpent. A precise chop to the back of one's neck, a sweeping leg to unbalance the other, followed by a swift, non-lethal pommel strike to the temple. The two men were down and secured before they could utter a sound, their snores now the only indication they had ever been there. Serena's voice crackled through their comms, a disembodied whisper. "Nice work. I'm into their local network. They're running everything on a closed circuit, but the encryption is sloppy, amateurish, compared to Cashia's work. I've looped the camera feeds at the access point. You have a 2-minute window. Go." They emerged from the lava tube into the bowels of the facility. The contrast was jarring. The organic, dangerous chaos of the tunnels gave way to a world of sterile, white corridors, humming fluorescent lights, and the distant, rhythmic pounding of heavy machinery. They were inside the beast. The infiltration was a masterclass in silent tension. Serena was their guiding ghost, her voice a calm presence in their ears, directing them through maintenance shafts and forgotten service corridors. Left at the next junction. Wait. Infrared sensor grid in the floor ahead. Pikachu, can you create a small, localized EMP? Just enough to disable it for 30 seconds. Pikachu, perched on Ash's shoulder, gave a determined squeak. He focused, his cheeks sparking not with a massive bolt, but with a controlled, precise pulse of electromagnetic energy. The red laser grid ahead flickered and died. 30 seconds, Ash whispered, and they moved, a silent, efficient unit, slipping through the gap before the system reset. They encountered another patrol, this time in a brightly lit corridor. There was no room for stealth. It was Cynthia who acted. Her Garchomp, which had been moving with the impossible silence of a land shark, materialized from the shadows of a large pipe junction. It didn't roar, didn't issue a grand challenge. It simply moved. A dragon rush that was less an attack and more a localized earthquake. A blur of blue and gray that disabled the guards with overwhelming force before they could even raise their weapons. Impressive, Lyra admitted, her professional respect overriding any sense of rivalry. Cynthia simply recalled her Pokémon with a quiet click, her enigmatic smile in place. Garchomp dislikes wasted effort. Deeper they went, the rhythmic pounding growing louder, the heat more intense. Ash's aura sight was now picking up a massive, singular energy signature ahead. It was discordant, parasitic, a screaming violation of the natural energy that flowed through the earth. "We're close," he breathed. They emerged onto a gantry overlooking a cavern of truly epic proportions. This was the heart of the operation, and it was far more horrifying than a simple drill. The chamber was a fusion of natural volcanic rock and cold, syndicate steel. In the center, suspended by massive cables and pylons, was a crystalline apparatus the size of a small building. It pulsed with a sickly, violet light, and 1,000 crystalline tendrils, like the roots of a monstrous tree, had burrowed deep into the cavern floor, which glowed with the raw, unfiltered heat of a magma chamber just below. This was the leech. It was siphoning the geothermal energy directly from the planet's mantle. Arrayed around the device were dozens of syndicate technicians and scientists, all moving with a feverish purpose, and on a central command platform, directing them all, was a man with thinning hair, wild, enthusiastic eyes, and a lab coat stained with coffee and something that looked suspiciously like scorch marks. Serena's voice was a choked whisper in their ears. "That's Dr. Aris Thorn, head of Xenogeological Energetics. He's a genius. And completely insane. His theory was that humanity's energy crisis could be solved by negotiating directly with the planet. I think this is his negotiation." "The tremors," Cynthia said, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "They're not a byproduct of the drilling. They're a response. This machine isn't just drawing power. It's an irritant. A needle poking a sleeping giant. They're trying to wake Groudon up." "Why?" Lyra asked, her hand on her dagger. "Why not just take the energy?" "Because a wild, rampaging Groudon is an uncontrollable catastrophe," Ash realized, the full, monstrous scope of the plan crashing down on him. "But a Groudon that has just been woken up, that is groggy, enraged, and disoriented by this parasitic drain on its power. That is a Groudon you can fight. A Groudon you can capture." At that moment, as if sensing their presence, Thorn looked up, his wild eyes seeming to lock directly onto their hiding spot. He grinned, a manic, triumphant expression. "Oh, the welcoming party. A bit late, I'm afraid. The final sequence has already begun." Alarms blared, crimson lights flashing across the cavern. Steel shutters slammed down over the exits. They were trapped. "He knew we were coming," Lyra snarled. "No," Serena corrected from the comms, her voice frantic. "He didn't. I'm reading the network logs. I tripped a silent alarm when I bypassed the primary encryption. It wasn't sloppy, it was bait. They knew someone would try a brute force hack. They were waiting for me. For us." From a platform below Thorn, a section of the floor opened, and a Pokémon rose into the chamber. It was a Metagross, but like nothing they had ever seen. Its metallic body was augmented with syndicate technology, glowing with the same sickly violet energy as the leech. Additional armor plates covered its joints, and a targeting laser gleamed where one of its eyes should have been. "My personal project." Thorn cackled with glee. "Metagross, model, Goliath, optimized for sub-legendary threat neutralization. Engage." The battle was immediate and brutal. "Garchomp, Dragon Claw," Cynthia commanded, her calm demeanor replaced by the sharp focus of a champion. "Lyra, find a way to the central console. Disrupt the power flow," Ash ordered, taking command. "Pikachu, Volt Tackle. Aim for the joints." Garchomp and the Goliath Metagross met in the center of the cavern, a cataclysm of steel and dragon hide. The sound of their blows echoed like a forge hammer. But the augmented Metagross was unnaturally fast and strong, its psychic abilities amplified by its tech, allowing it to predict and counter Garchomp's attacks with terrifying precision. Lyra moved like a ghost along the gantries, her daggers flashing as she took down technicians who tried to intercept her. She was grace and lethality, a mountain spirit in a high-tech hell. Pikachu became a bolt of living lightning, slamming into Metagross's leg. But the syndicate armor held, the blow staggering the steel behemoth but not disabling it. Ash watched the battle, his mind processing 1,000 variables. They were outmatched. Thorn's Metagross was designed specifically to fight a Pokémon of Garchomp's caliber. Lyra would never reach the console in time. And the leech. The parasitic pulse was growing stronger, faster. The tremors were becoming violent, shaking the entire cavern. Dust and rock rained from the ceiling. He realized the horrifying truth. They couldn't win this fight. Not by playing Thorn's game. Attacking the Metagross, fighting the grunts. It was all a distraction from the real objective. Someone has to be the shield. Cynthia, Lyra. Keep them busy, Ash yelled, his voice ringing with an absolute authority that made them obey without question. He broke from cover, not attacking, but running directly towards the monstrous, pulsing crystalline leech. A futile gesture. Mr. Ketchum. Thorn screamed over the din. You can't destroy it, it's channeling the very core of the planet. He's right, Ash thought. I can't destroy it, but maybe, I can talk to it. He leapt from the gantry, landing on the central platform at the base of the leech. The heat was intense, the air shimmering around him. He ignored the frantic technicians, ignored the raging battle behind him. He placed both of his hands on the cold, vibrating crystal of the main console. And he reached. He pushed his consciousness, his aura, past the Syndicate's corrupting technology, following the crystalline roots down, into the earth. He pushed through bedrock and tectonic plates, through a world of unimaginable pressure and heat. He was searching for a consciousness, a mind. And he found it. It was not a mind of thoughts and words, but of magma and gravity, of continental drift and the slow, patient anger of stone. It was a consciousness the size of a planet, sleeping a fitful, agonized sleep, its dreams filled with the sharp, incessant pain of the needle in its side. The rage was a physical thing, a force that threatened to overwhelm him, to burn his mind to ash. He didn't fight it. He didn't try to soothe it. He simply opened himself to it, becoming a conduit. He sent a single, clear message, not in language, but in pure intent. An image of the leech, of the invaders, of his desire to help. A shared purpose. Less than I am here. We will remove the thorn. Lend me your strength. Greater than. Thorn, seeing what Ash was doing, paled. What is he doing? Stop him, he's interfacing directly. But it was too late. The rage of the continent Pokémon found a channel. It surged upwards, not as an attack, but as an answer. The floor of the cavern cracked. Not a small fissure, but a massive, gaping wound in the earth, splitting the chamber in two. Raw, incandescent magma began to well up, not exploding, but rising with a dreadful, inexorable purpose. The sickly violet light of the leech was swallowed by the pure, primal orange of the planet's core. Ash was engulfed in the light. The brown of his eyes was consumed by a molten gold. The air around him superheated, his clothes smoking, but he did not burn. He felt the ancient, unstoppable power of the earth flow into him, through him. He was no longer just Ash Ketchum. He was a vessel for Groudon's awakening fury. Beautiful. Thorn screamed, a mad prophet witnessing the apocalypse he had engineered. It's waking. The chapter ends there. Ash, standing at the epicenter of a volcanic event, bathed in the glow of magma, his eyes blazing with the borrowed power of a god. He is the shield, but he has just become the focal point for the very disaster he was trying to prevent. The fire beneath has risen, and he is its herald. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Echoes of the core. The world did not explode. It dissolved into heat and light. The raw, unfiltered essence of the planet's mantle surged upwards, not as a chaotic eruption, but as a controlled, incandescent tide. The sickly violet of the Syndicate's leech was annihilated, its crystalline structure sublimating into vapor under the impossible temperature. The cavern became a crucible, and at its heart stood Ash Ketchum, his body a silhouette against a sun born from the earth's core. The molten gold in his eyes was not a reflection, it was a source. He was no longer looking at the world, but through it, his consciousness intertwined with the slow, tectonic fury of Groudon. He felt the grinding of continents, the pressure of mountains, the patient, burning anger of a billion years of silence, now disturbed. Magnificent! Thorn shrieked, his voice cracking with insane ecstasy. He was not afraid. He was a zealot witnessing a miracle. The feedback loop is perfect. The human aura as a focusing lens for primordial energy. Data. I need data. The Goliath Metagross, its programming overridden by the sheer seismic chaos, ceased its attack on Garchomp. Its cold, logical mind could not compute the event unfolding. It stood frozen, a statue of steel amidst a rising tide of fire. Ash. Lyra's voice was a raw cry, torn between terror and awe. She was a daughter of the unshakable mountains, and here she was watching a man command the very substance that created them. The gantry beneath her feet buckled, groaning in protest as the cavern's foundations gave way. Cynthia's face was a mask of cold, analytical focus, but her gray eyes blazed with an intensity that rivaled the magma below. This was not a battle anymore. This was a mythological event. She was an archaeologist who had stumbled into the pages of the very history she studied. The structural integrity is gone. We can't go back the way we came. He's right. The entire substructure is collapsing. Serena's voice, strained and tinny over the comms, was their only link to the outside world. I've lost 90% of the facility's schematics to the power surge, but I've found a possible exit, a primary exhaust vent for the geothermal turbines, 12 meters above your position on the north wall. It's our only way out. The path to the vent was a death trap. Gantries twisted and fell, plunging into the rising magma with hellish hisses. The air was a shimmering, unbreathable wave of heat. Ash turned his head, the movement slow, deliberate, as if he were turning a continent on its axis. His molten gaze fell not on his friends, but on the magma itself. He raised a hand, his palm open. And the magma obeyed. With a sound like the world tearing in half, a section of the molten tide solidified. It didn't cool, it simply became rock, a bridge of jagged, steaming obsidian that formed a precarious path from their collapsing gantry toward the north wall. It was an act of creation born from an act of destruction, a violation of every known law of physics. He's controlling it, Cynthia breathed, her scholarly mind struggling to categorize the impossible. Go. The voice that came from Ash's lips was not entirely his own. It was a layered chorus, his own familiar tone underpinned by the deep, resonant rumble of rock and fire. It was a command that could not be disobeyed. Lyra was the first to move, her warrior instincts taking over. She grabbed Cynthia's arm, pulling her from her analytical stupor. He made us a path. We take it. They ran. The newly formed bridge was treacherously hot, the soles of their boots smoking with every step. Behind them, Thorn's Metagross, finally breaking from its paralysis, attempted to follow, but its immense weight was too much for the unstable structure. With a screech of tearing metal, the gantry it stood on gave way, and the augmented behemoth plunged into the magma, disappearing without a trace. Dr. Thorne watched it go with a detached, academic curiosity, before turning his wild eyes back to Ash. Fascinating. The sacrifice of the knight to protect the king. But the king is the most valuable piece on the board. He brandished a complex-looking scanner from his lab coat. Just one reading. One sample of this symbiotic energy, and I can replicate it. He scrambled across the crumbling command platform, his destination not an escape route, but Ash himself. He was a moth flying not just into a flame, but into the heart of a star. Lyra and Cynthia reached the relative safety of a solid rock ledge just below the exhaust vent. Ash, come on, Lyra screamed, her voice hoarse. But Ash did not move. He stood on his platform, a lone island in a sea of fire, his attention fixed on the approaching scientist. The power flowing through him was a roaring, infinite ocean, but his body was a mortal shore, and it was beginning to erode. He could feel his cells screaming in protest, his nervous system overloaded. He had to sever the connection, but he couldn't, not while Thorn was still there, a symbol of the greed that had caused all this. Pikachu, who had been clinging to Ash's back, his fur singed, his body crackling with a mixture of his own electricity and the ambient planetary energy, could feel his partner's agony. With a cry of desperate loyalty, he leapt from Ash's shoulder. He did not attack Thorn. He landed on Ash's chest, a tiny, yellow anchor in a storm of golden fire, and discharged all of his own stored electricity directly into his trainer's heart. It was not an attack, it was a defibrillator, a grounding rod, a desperate attempt to remind the god of the boy inside. The shock jolted Ash. The perfect, molten gold in his eyes flickered, and for a second, a speck of familiar, mortal brown returned. The connection to Groudon wavered. The solidified bridge of obsidian groaned, cracks spreading across its surface. No, Thorn howled, seeing his prize slipping away. He lunged, his scanner outstretched. Just one sample. Ash, in that moment of fleeting clarity, saw him. He saw the madness, the insatiable hunger for power that respected no boundaries. He raised his hand one last time, not to create, but to let go. The platform beneath Thorn's feet, which Ash had been unconsciously holding together, dissolved. The manic scientist's triumphant grin twisted into a brief, comical look of surprise before he, too, was swallowed by the fire he had so eagerly courted. There was no scream, only the soft hiss of a problem being erased from existence. With Thorn gone, the final imperative was complete. Ash collapsed to his knees, the golden light in his eyes dying like the embers of a great fire. The connection snapped. The power receded, rushing back into the Earth's core, leaving a vacuum that was a pain more profound than any burn. The obsidian bridge shattered. The magma roared back into the spaces it had been denied. The entire cavern began to collapse in on itself, a dying star imploding. "He's cut off," Lyra yelled. "Not yet," Cynthia pointed upwards. Her Garchomp, who had been clinging to the cavern ceiling, had not been idle. On Cynthia's silent command, it pushed off, diving like a missile. It snatched Ash's unconscious form and Pikachu from the crumbling platform an instant before it was consumed. Its powerful claws surprisingly gentle. With a powerful beat of its wings, it soared upwards, depositing them on the ledge with Lyra and Cynthia just as the exhaust vent's massive turbine fan, its power cut, groaned to a halt. They scrambled through the silent blades and into the darkness of the vent shaft. Behind them, the cavern sealed itself in a final, deafening implosion of rock and magma, burying Project Chimera's Hoenn laboratory forever. The journey back to the surface was a grim, silent affair. Garchomp carried Ash's limp body, while Lyra held the exhausted Pikachu. When they finally emerged into the humid, cloying air of the jungle, the sun felt like a pale imitation of the light they had just escaped. They made it back to the Wyvern, Serena rushing down the ramp, her face pale with dread. "I saw the entire facility go dark. I thought." Her words died in her throat as she saw Ash. They laid him on a medical bunk. His clothes were scorched and fused to his skin in places. Steam rose from his body, and his skin, where visible, was flushed a feverish, angry red. He was breathing, but it was shallow, ragged. He was not merely unconscious, he was depleted on a cellular level. The atmosphere inside the cool, sterile transport was thick with a new, complex tension. The three women stood around the bunk, their shared victory overshadowed by the terrifying price that had been paid. Each of them saw him, and their burgeoning feelings for him, through a different lens. Lyra, the warrior, saw a comrade who had thrown himself onto the proverbial grenade. Her hands, trained for daggers and combat, were clumsy as she tried to apply a cool compress to his forehead. Her fierce independence warred with a powerful, unfamiliar urge to protect, to nurture. The man who had faced her father with unbending will was now utterly vulnerable, and it stirred a deep, primal protectiveness in her. Serena, the scientist, was in her element, yet completely lost. Her instrument scanned Ash's vitals, the readings so far off the charts they were almost meaningless. "His body temperature is 45 degrees Celsius, she murmured, her voice a mixture of clinical observation and profound fear. "His bioelectric field is frayed. It's like a circuit that's had 1,000,000,000 volts forced through it. I don't know how he's alive." She felt a crushing weight of responsibility. Her intellect had led them here. Her failure to detect the trap had sprung it. His condition felt like her fault, and the intellectual admiration she felt for him was now tangled with a desperate need to fix what her world of logic and data had helped to break. Cynthia, the scholar, was the quietest. She simply watched him, her gray eyes thoughtful and distant. She was not seeing a patient or a fallen comrade. She was seeing a historical artifact, a living bridge between the human and the divine. She had read the ancient Sinnoh myths of the ones who could speak to the creators, but she had always assumed it was metaphor. This was not metaphor. This was literal. The implications were staggering, rewriting everything she thought she knew about the world. Her fascination with the puzzle of Ash Ketchum had just become a profound, academic obsession. He was the greatest discovery of her life, and the intellectual curiosity she felt was so potent it was almost indistinguishable from attraction. Pikachu, recovered enough to move, hopped onto the bunk and curled up on Ash's chest, right over his heart, a small, warm, living battery trying to share what little energy he had left. Hours passed. Serena stabilized his temperature with cryogenic packs. Lyra stood guard at the door, her daggers in hand, as if she could fight off death itself. Cynthia cross-referenced the data Serena had managed to download with her own vast database of world myths, searching for any precedent, any clue to what had happened. Finally, late into the night, Serena let out a small gasp. "I found something," she said, her voice hushed. She had been sifting through the corrupted data fragments from Thorn's lab, piecing them together. "It's a heavily encrypted communique, sent from the H8 facility just before we arrived. It's not from Thorn." She projected the message. It was a single line of text, addressed to an unknown recipient designated only as Olympus. Phase 2 acid test successful. Subject Ketchum has confirmed symbiotic potential with terrestrial Titan class. He is the key. Proceed with Phase 3. Target: Spear Pillar. The three women stared at the message, the air in the wyvern growing colder than any cryopack. Spear Pillar, Cynthia whispered, her voice filled with a dread that chilled them to the bone. The most sacred place in all of Sinnoh. The temple at the summit of Mount Coronet. The place where Dialga and Palkia were said to have been born. Their victory in Hoenn suddenly felt small, insignificant. They hadn't just stumbled upon a rogue science experiment. They had walked onto one square of a galaxy-spanning chessboard. They had destroyed a lab, but in doing so, they had given the true masterminds of Project Chimera exactly what they wanted. They hadn't stopped a plan. They had just confirmed they were a vital part of it, and Ash, lying broken and unconscious before them, was not their hero. He was the Syndicate's ultimate prize. Chapter 5 End.